Okay, the Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God, who knowest us to be set in the midst of so many and great dangers, that by reason of the frailty of our nature we cannot always stand upright, grant to us such strength and protection as may support us in all dangers and carry us through all temptations, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You'll see there's a reason for that. So today we're changing gears ever so slightly. We're going to take a look at the book of Ecclesiastes. We are actually a little bit ahead of the readings. What I want to do today is hopefully give some things to be thinking about as we're reading through this when we get to it, because it can be ever so slightly difficult, a book. Ecclesiastes is part of what's known as wisdom literature in the biblical or the Jewish organization of Scripture. Okay, you may have heard of the term. It's actually an acronym, Tanakh. So you have the Torah, the Nevi'im, or the prophets. And that would include not only Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so forth, but also the historical books we've been reading. So, Joshua, Judges, and so forth would be prophetic books, which is part of the reason I think we've been talking about them theologically, because they are prophetic. And then you have the Ketuvim, or the writings, and that's kind of the grab bag. So that's going to include Ruth and Esther and Lamentations and Psalms. And sort of the interesting one in there is Song of Solomon, Song of Songs. That actually got added to the Jewish canon of Scripture. And the main reason you have multiple canons of the Old Testament in the Christian world, different ones for the Eastern Orthodox versus the Roman Catholics versus the Protestants and so forth, is that you didn't have a set canon in the day of Christ. It was about 100 years later that the Jews set a canon, and then the Protestants followed that, and then though we're 1,400 years older than the Protestants, we went along with the Protestants on the canon of Scripture. But again, you'll see the Roman Catholics will be a little bit different. Anyway, when the Jews set the canon, they included Song of Solomon on condition, essentially, that it be read allegorically. And because of that, some people would include Song of Solomon as wisdom literature. Others, and I would agree with these others, will say it's really mystical poetry. That's the best way to understand that. So we have our three books, Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. That would be wisdom literature. Job is tricky, I think, because it pulls a bit of a bait and switch. Right? Job goes on and on and on and on and on about, why am I suffering, though I'm a good man? Well, maybe you're not such a good man. Yes, I am. No, you're not. That whole thing's going back and forth between these guys. In the end, God shows up and discards that whole question. The whole thing is about the relationship with God. And when you read Job carefully, that's really what he's concerned about. His suffering, he thinks, is indicative of the loss of this relationship with God, which had formerly been very close. And he's lamenting that as much as anything. And then God commends him at the end because he's concerned with being right with God, whereas his friends are concerned with being right about God. And those are two different things. And so what this is going to say ultimately is the wise man is focused on his relationship with God. Proverbs will say many of the same things. It's going to cover a little more territory. It's going to be very focused on character development. And that's essentially what all the wisdom books have in common. Ecclesiastes, we'll see today, is going to be very affected by its author's massive frustration with the fact that humanity, any person, is a being whose deepest desire is for permanence and certitude. And we live in a world that guarantees us neither of those those things. The only thing you know is that you're going to die, and you don't know when. So he's going to go on and on about that. So there's this frustration. And of course, as C.S. Lewis points out in The Problem of Pain, if this world can't provide your deepest desires, maybe you were designed for something beyond just this world. So the author knows that, and he expects you to get it. So we'll see that as we go along. Now, basically, Job's impossible to date, and it doesn't really matter. You know, I would put it as probably the oldest book in the Bible, precisely because it's the most sophisticated. It's certainly generally regarded as the greatest literary masterpiece of the Old Testament, which is saying something. But again, I think the older the book is, probably the more sophisticated it is. Other people would say the opposite. What do they know? Proverbs, again, generally scholars will say parts of Proverbs, particularly like chapters 9 through 30, are probably pre-exilic. Other parts are probably post-exilic. Again, who cares? It's timeless information. Ecclesiastes, as we'll see, is almost certainly post-exilic. It's, again, Persian loanwords. This is after the Babylonian exile. So this is going to be probably a 5th or 4th century BC work. So from the 500s, well after the end of the, or 400s, more likely. Anyway, 4th, even maybe the 300s. We'll see that. And again, it doesn't matter all that much. What it has to say is timeless, and we'll take a look at that. Now, some people will claim a bit of a dichotomy between the Torah and its very clear moral code: do this, do this, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, and the approach of wisdom literature. A wise man is this way, and a fool is like that. And in reality, of course, because, again, Ecclesiastes, none of these books are going to refer to what the Torah requires you to do. What they are going to do, and this is where these two things go together, is encourage you to have a particular kind of character. To be the kind, if you're the kind of person that Proverbs wants you to be, you're more likely not only to keep the Torah, but to understand why you're doing it. And of course, Job, if you heed Job, you'd have a good relationship with God, and that is going to be essential to keeping the Torah. Now there's not this simplistic sort of, good boys and girls get Christmas presents and bad boys and girls get coal in their stockings. I think we all know this. Again, this is a book, and all of these are books for grown-ups. So particularly Ecclesiastes and Job are going to pour lots of cold water on the notion that the good will prosper and the wicked will suffer. Well, maybe ultimately they will, but in this world, we all know better. So again, we're as with any book of scripture, it's written for grown-ups. So you also won't get, particularly in Ecclesiastes, you don't get the sort of self-justifying attitude that you can see amongst adolescent atheists, where, those awful Christians have this moral code and they don't keep it very well, so they're hypocrites, and I don't hold myself to that moral code, so I could never be a hypocrite. I mean, that's kid stuff, right? Grown-ups properly don't do that sort of thing. Lots of grown-ups do, and shame on them. All right. Any questions on background? It clearly claims to have been written by Solomon. It's almost certainly not. Again, not only are you affected by the Persians, but you've been affected by the Persians long enough that you're using Persian words in your language. Okay? Kind of the way, Old English was essentially equivalent to Old German. And then, it developed over time, and then after 1066 and all that, when the Normans come in and started dumping loads of French in the English language, we're now almost as much a French language as we are Germanic. Well, something similar is going on here. All right, so this is, again, almost certainly 500 years after the death of Solomon. So why would you use Solomon? Well, we'll take a look at that. Basically, I would think of this as being along the lines of, say, a one-man show. Remember back in the day when the great actor Hal Holbrook would come out and he's Mark Twain and he would say Twainisms and so forth. I've got the same thing. Dean Jones, remember him from Herbie the Love Bug and those old Disney flicks? Dean Jones, late in life, was a very devout Christian, and he used to do a one-man show where he's the Apostle John. And he would come on, and he's John, and he's talking all these Johannian things. Great thing. So I think we're getting something more like that. He's taking on the persona of Solomon in order to make a point, and we'll look at what that point is. The title, Ecclesiastes, is simply the Greek for Kohelet, which has to do with kahal, or assembly. Some would say in English it would be the preacher. This commentator says the sage would be a better term for it. We could call him the bishop. But this is either a title, probably not a name. Okay, so he's the leader of the assembly or speaking on behalf of it. So we'll go back and forth about the author's title here. Scholars have gone back and forth about whether there's a structure here or not. This is one possibility. You obviously have an introduction and a postscript that are roughly the same length, which is what you would expect in Hebrew storytelling because it's going to have a chiastic structure. So what you can see, well, maybe we're dealing with the futility of human enterprise in and of itself. The futility of life in this world considered on its own without any reference to divine transcendence. And then we have discussion of the riskiness of life and the difficulty of achieving wisdom. Some commentators have said, given the author's focus on death, the organization here may be more like a decaying body. It's a little fuzzier around the edges than it might otherwise be. Nevertheless, there's this understanding that the futility of life in this world considered on its own, if you have the misfortune of being an atheist, you're really, 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 really honest, which not everybody is, but nevertheless, you're going to see the futility of life and the need for God. Again, C.S. Lewis, if our deepest desires cannot be met here, perhaps we were intended for something more than here. And he knows that. And again, he expects you. Concepts that are going to be important as we go through the book. First and foremost, the Hebrew word hebel, which we get as vanity. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That comes from Matthaiotes, was the translation of hebel in the Septuagint, and then Jerome renders it as vanitas, which guess what, is a Latin loan word to English, so we get it as vanity. But it's going to imply vaporous is actually probably the best translation, though again, this is one of those words that's hard to translate. So I was talking with some of us about this earlier. Some words are just hard to directly translate. Fleeting could be another term for it. In other contexts where we encounter the word hebel in sacred scripture, it usually has to do with the futility of idol worship. So there's going to be a connection to idolatry. And I think he intends that. I think he intends you to, when he talks about life under the sun being vanity or being vain or being, is this sense of if you're idolatrous, if you have no connection to the God of Israel, there's this this futility to life that, again, should point you in the direction, okay, how do we get out of this God? Another thing that the Anchor Bible dude makes a big deal of, and it probably does matter, is that the Persians had introduced a monetary system. Because remember, what they're doing, they've conquered, and they're trying to get a prosperous Judah, land of Judah, so that they can make lots of money and send it to the Persians in taxes, and the Persians can use that to fund their wars. So they're going to use a monetary system to convert labor to warfare, and that you would not necessarily have had in previous times. You would have had more of a subsistence economy, not as much dependence on cash. So you have a different discussion. You have a more modern discussion than you might have found in other books about hoarding wealth and so forth, and the rich lording it over the poor, because now you have money to determine who's richer than other people. So that's another thing that's going to be going on here. The importance of nature, the main thing I would get from this is a distinction between when he used the terms under the sun, and sun may very well have idolatrous connotations. So that which is under the sun is that which is done without reference to the transcendent order, versus that which is under heaven. So we'll see this. So mainly there'll be a distinction drawn between the futility of what is done under the sun, the world in and of itself, versus the more positive connotations of that which is under heaven. Okay, I remember a country song by Pete Seeger, actually, that the Birds used to sing. That's all under heaven. We'll take a look at that. So that's a much more positive sort of connotation to it. So generally, you're going to get that. So the notion of man being under the sun, chasing the wind, this is futility of life without reference to divine transcendence. And then finally, a lot of his talk about death is going to sound much more negative, because the theology of heaven and hell really hasn't developed by this time. It's a later development in the Second Temple period. We'll get to that later in the year. So for him, death means going to Sheol, which is like living in a cave. It's kind of dank and dark and musty, but it's where God intends dead people to be. Remember when we looked at Samuel, right? When Samuel's spirit gets called up out of Sheol and he's cheesed off, why are you dragging me out of Sheol? It's not because it's such a great place to be. It's because that's where God wants them. Dead people go to Sheol. And so there's this trust. God's goodness means there's something good about being in Sheol, whatever that is. Now, we can say now that they are waiting for Christ. And his harrowing, we say harrowing hell, it's probably better to say harrowing Sheol. That he goes down and releases those souls down there. We get that in the Testament. Okay? Any questions on the background on Ecclesiastes? All right, so we begin. Chapters 1 and 2. All is vanity. Again, first of all, he's putting on the persona of Solomon, and it's kind of obvious, actually. I mean, Solomon is the wealthiest, wisest, most powerful Jew who has ever lived to this time. So if he's not satisfied with stuff, and he's got more stuff and more women and more cash and more power than you could ever imagine having, if he's not satisfied with that, well, maybe you shouldn't be trying to satisfy yourself with stuff, right? Hanging over his head is death. And we all know Solomon, by the time this is written, Solomon's been dead at least 500 years. So we can understand that if it came for him, it's going to come for us. So that's what this has to do with. You need to be looking for something else. And he's going to make reference, of course, to Solomon's wisdom. If wisdom says, don't seek satisfaction in stuff, then be wise and don't seek satisfaction in stuff. Okay, so so he goes through the stuff you're not going to be satisfied. So we start with, life in this world, then we go on to wisdom in and of itself does not satisfy. If anything, it makes you more miserable. His talk about wisdom, in some ways, is similar to when Paul talks about the law or the Torah. When Paul is talking about the Torah, he recognizes it's a good thing. But all it does is tell you what a miserable, rotten sinner you are. You're more miserable knowing how awful you are than, say, the ignorant savages out there are. Well, similar sort of thing here. The wise man knows how unsatisfactory his life is on its own. Pleasure-seeking, of course. Right? Again, we don't need to, Solomon has opportunities that the rest of us maybe don't have. So again, that's not good enough either. Okay? So wisdom is better than folly. but is neither going to save. Okay, so then we go on to our buddy Pete Seeger here, and everybody can start coming to the tune, of course. Now here, again, not talking about what's under the sun and that futility. Here we're talking about what's going on under heaven, and it's very carefully constructed poem, actually. You have the series of antipodes. So there's a time for birth and a time for death. So you have a positive thing, then a negative. We'll have two of those. We'll have positive, negative, positive, negative. So two positive negatives. Then we have four negative positives. Then we have four positive negatives, two negative positives, and then one of each, and we end on peace. A time for war, a time for peace is the last of these. So we begin with birth. That's the first of the antipodes, and we end not in war, we end in peace. So again, what takes place under heaven is presented relatively positively, and it's well organized. So this is pointing us to this need to understand the order of God. This is what we're called to, and we can find joy in doing so. All right. He then moves on to talk about justice. Justice lies in God, but in this world, you won't necessarily find perfect justice, and we all know that. He certainly does. So understand, we live in a vale of tears where oppressors are going to oppress. And again, in his world, again, the Persians have brought a certain amount of peace and prosperity. This is in many ways a very modern book. One, because of its tremendous individualism. He will talk about it as an evil under the sun, that you die, don't get to use any of your wealth, and you have to leave it to your children. Again, very individualistic. Most of us would think, fine, if I die and leave my wealth to my children, I'm happy for them. But he's going to take that, again, considering life purely by itself, that's a negative thing. So it's very individualistic in its approach to things. And also, yes.
Now you've done it.
Yeah, I know. But nevertheless, there's this, there was another one in there. Anyway, he's, let's focus, I lost the thought. Anyway, I'll write it up one of these days. Okay, so nevertheless, we close out chapter 4 with a set of aphorisms, again, preferring wisdom to foolishness. I suppose the other thing about it is this sense of moderate your expectations here in this world. So wisdom is better than foolishness, but don't expect it to make everything perfect or wonderful. Right? It's not going to, you're going to die. And that he's going to keep coming back to that. You're going to die and you don't know when. So again, the number one thing you want, or the number one and two things, or maybe tied to one anyway, is you want certitude and you want longevity, and you're not going to get either of those things. You're going to die and you don't know when. He's going to keep coming back to that over and over again, which should drive you, again, to be looking for something beyond. Chapter 5, we'll take a look at wisdom in religious practice. What we're going to see here is he'll talk about not making rash vows and not using empty words in your prayer. That may sound like something Christ will say later on. What we should be thinking about as we're coming into this would be Ananias and Sapphira from the book of Acts, who rashly vow to do something, then they don't, then they lie about it, then God kills them. So, and they deserve it. But again, this is, the wise man is careful in how he approaches his spiritual life. Don't lie to God. Wealth will then come to the fore. And again, a lot of the discussion here and the sort of negative attitude toward the rich is helped a bit when you recognize that the Persians are dominating society and have jacked the taxes up through the roof. So they are, again, they're trying to pay for all their warfare and their big empire, and they're taking money from you. So there's, they have, this was the point I was going to make earlier, they have brought a certain amount of peace and prosperity to Israel. And that makes it very much like the world we live in. We live in a relatively prosperous, actually, we live in an excruciating, amazingly prosperous world that is relatively peaceful. We don't really have to worry. He's worried about death, but he's not worried about your enemies coming in and attacking and destroying your village, because the Persians have cut that out. Okay, we're in a similar kind of situation. And so, but nevertheless, he is constantly worried about that. Guys, you don't know when you're going to get cancer. They wouldn't know if they saw one. They not having the foggiest idea how to treat it. We can fix that, but then we got cars that we can go out and get killed in. So, we're not any safer than they were necessarily. So, okay, that's what would, getting back to my earlier point, that's one of the things that would make this a fairly modern book, is it has a lot of the concerns you have when you're not really worried about enemies coming in and conquering. You are worried about, wealthy people taking advantage of you, and we kind of see a little bit of that in our world. He will talk about I think early in chapter 6, he talks about a great evil under the sun. Again, when he says under the sun, he's talking about the world without reference to divine transcendence. So evils under the sun would be some people gain wealth and die without any opportunity to get any enjoyment out of it. And then they're stuck leaving it to their kids. Again, he sees that as not such a good thing looked at on its own. If you have this kind of individualist, godless worldview that he describes, you'll see that. So anyway, that's he's not blaming God for killing these people where they can spend their money. He's just saying that's part of the uncertainty of life in the world we live in. One of these days we may talk about the difference between moral evil, the fact that we live in a sinful, broken world, and natural evil, and the fact that we live in a world that is simply dangerous, right? The kind of world that God is talking about when he's in the whirlwind talking to Job. Leviathan and Behemoth are poetic expressions of the fact we live in a world that happens to be dangerous, right? Plate tectonics is what it is, and that has nothing to do with evil. All right, anyway. So that's really what this is getting at, is we live in a dangerous world, stuff's getting at. Chapter 6 is kind of a transition to sort of part 2 of the book. So he's going to be contemplating human wisdom. And again, wisdom is a mixed bag, because it brings you knowledge of your own finitude. If you're really a fool, you never think about this stuff at all, and you can be cheerier about life, but you won't have joy. You might have pleasure, but not joy. He's going to be very clear, look for joy. But one of the things that wisdom is going to do is open your eyes to see opportunities for joy in whatever time you have. He also asks about who knows the answers to the great questions in life. How long do I have? How long? He's not asking that rhetorically. He's asking you to contemplate who does know these things. That's the direction he's sending you. And he'll ask a lot of rhetorical sounding questions. If he were a cynic, he would be asking rhetorical questions, but he's asking straightforwardly, who knows these things? God knows. He's directing them toward him. Okay, limits of wisdom. He starts off with a set of aphorisms in chapter 7 about the desirability of a good name, but it's limited. It'll only last so long, you'll croak, and then you won't have a good name anymore, that sort of thing. So, avoid fools, avoid anger and pride. Don't indulge in nostalgia too much. Nostalgia can be a way of gaining some joy. You look back on the days when you were a child, or when you were with a loved one who has passed on, that kind of thing. It's not a bad thing to do, but don't wallow in it. We got a very confusing proverb next. It talks about, really, don't be too righteous, because you might die from all your righteousness. There's an implication there. It's a tough one, and again, the Brazos commenter, I think, gets it right. What he's really talking is about your motivation. Do not look to righteousness to make you popular. In this world, the secular world doesn't know the difference between the righteousness of God and the righteousness of the self. right? They assume you're being self-righteous, right? We hear that all the time. Well, reality, right? Atheists are going to be much more inclined to that because they don't have the righteousness of God available to them. So there's only the righteousness of the self. So you're going to get that. Anyway, don't look to get something out of righteousness. Okay, seek it for itself, and he'll ask the question again. It may look like a rhetorical question, but it's not. Why would you die? Right? Why would you die for right? Well, think about that. Why would I? For Christ to be like him? He's not going to say that's wrong, right? But he's getting you to think about what is a righteous life. Why are you doing? Again, wisdom is valuable, but not foolproof. But he does come in at the beginning of chapter 8 and say one very positive thing about wisdom, which is worth noting. It talks about a man's wisdom makes his face shine. This should bring us to that line in Numbers. The Lord make his face to shine upon him. So seeking wisdom is imitating God, which would tie it to the Torah from his standpoint. So this is something, he has a very high opinion of seeking wisdom, but he wants you to moderate your expectations of it regarding life in this world. He then contemplates obedience to earthly, i.e. Persian authority. The king has power, but it's limited in this life. So, don't get too hung up on the fact that somebody else has power over you. Don't get too hung up on justice versus injustice. Again, if you're into that sort of thing, there's nothing wrong with going to Black Lives Matter rallies or pro-life rallies, oppose injustice of abortion. That's fine. But it's very easy, and I think we run into people in our lives who manage to turn themselves into tedious prigs because all they ever do is worry about all the injustice out there.
I've got some friends like that.
Yeah, and you're probably one of them. Yeah, only on Facebook. Again, we all know people like that, and we all need to be careful that we don't turn into one of them. That's part of what he's talking about. Have perspective. You're going to die. That should give you some perspective. And again, come back to seek simple joys. Look for what wisdom does is give you eyes to see opportunities for joy. We have lots of them here. Right? We have time, we have lots of opportunities in this parish to get together. Of course, every week we have the greatest joy available to humanity. We have Holy Communion with Christ. We have the body of Christ taken into us. But we also have times to get together, to eat together, to visit together, to, et cetera, et cetera. Don't miss those opportunities. He's going to be very concerned. You could die tomorrow, so find joy today. God may transcend all that joy, after you're dead. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know about that. Okay, that's not been a developed thing. So he's trusting way more in God than you and I would. All right. Nevertheless, okay, so we get into, where are we? 9 and 10. Again, seeking joy, and of course we start off, the common fate of humanity is death. Right? Look for joy in the midst of that uncertainty in life. Okay? Death is an evil under the sun with the implication that God transcends it. He talks about eat your bread with enjoyment. This again comes back to looking for joy. The church fathers are going to tie that directly to Holy Communion. The great joy that we have, at least on a weekly basis here at South Florida. Chance affects all who live under the sun. Again, just be aware of that. Goodness is going to be, however much good you can do is going to be limited by the fact that, well, you're going to die, and you don't know when. Wisdom will be extolled for its own sake. And then we have, in chapter 10, we have some fairly clear moral maxims, about being a good person, but it's also going to be moderated by the fact that, the fastest don't always win. Chance affects us, right? The tortoise sometimes beats the hare because the tortoise is wise and the hare isn't. But, there's just, he's Gonna commend simple pleasures, and don't get too hung up on the thus and so-ness of life, as it were. Okay, finally, boy, this thing's having a good time today. All right. Talks about action as we come to the end of the book, chapters 11. Chapter 11 is going to talk about action. Don't sit passively through life, because you'll miss opportunities for joy for yourself and for bringing joy to others. That's the other thing. And the joy that you find in communion with others, whatever form that
The
communion.
universe rewards action.
Yes. And of course, again, that's a way of imitating God, because God always takes the initiative with us. It is God is not we who seek God, we should be seeking God, but you seek him while he wills to be found, and call upon him when he draws near. God takes the action. So this is imitating God, right? So it's also opposite. Okay, look for simple pleasures in life. Remember the transcendence of God. And the goodness of his creation, which also shines forth in Holy Communion. That incarnational character of the sacrament tells us something about the goodness of creation. That's what it means to talk about gifts and creatures of bread and wine. When I was a kid, I used to try and imagine what a creature of bread and wine, I mean, is it like a giraffe made out of but what that says is God's good creation. He transcends in coming to us in the true presence. So a life shorn of God's transcendence is what heaven is, vapor. We end with that brief biographical discussion, again, where he's reiterating who he is, commending wisdom, acknowledging its limitations, acknowledging that in a fallen world there are going to be limitations, but seek joy in fellowship with God and with his people. And again, the apparent negativity is going to have to do with the limitations of looking at that are inherent to looking at the world on its own. So, summing up, very fixed in the character of our author is this frustration of being a being who desires permanence and certitude, but living in a world where you're going to have neither, because you're going to die and you don't know when. Hence, you really belong somewhere beyond here. You do belong in this world, and he doesn't yet have a theology of resurrection yet. That's going to come along a little bit later. But this notion of, the church does not proclaim the immortality of the soul. We proclaim the resurrection of the body. So we would not say that we were not intended for this world. We are intended for more than this world because we're embodied beings, and we will be embodied beings in eternity, whatever eternity is. And again, eternity isn't simply length of time, it is an infinite present, whatever that is. So, nevertheless, again, he is haunted by death because that is going to show up in some way that we cannot necessarily anticipate. And so only a life lived in the light of God, taking joy in his presence, taking joy in his people, is the only life that makes sense. That's all he's getting. So, questions on Ecclesiastes? Yes,
You talked about the concept of Sheol.
yes.
Earlier in the book with the voices of. How would you relate that to Christ telling the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise?
Christ knows something that, well, one, the theology does develop after this. So once the Greeks conquer and that, there's a lot of development. If Sheol starts getting divided first in two, so there's good Sheol for good people and bad Sheol for bad people. Then it gets divided in three, because you've got good people, bad people, and sort of in between people. And then there's this sense of heaven being, remember when Lazarus dies in the parable, he's at the bosom of of Abraham, and there's this gulf between him and the rich man in torment. Well, here you're much closer to a notion of heaven and hell. So when Christ is talking about today being with him in paradise, he's got, even the thief has that background that Kohelet or the author of this book wouldn't yet have. I don't know if that makes sense. And then Christ obviously has the authority to bring anybody he wants to into paradise. So, and he can read hearts in a way that you and I can't. So he knows this man, he knows what he's thinking, he knows what he's going through. And he knows what he deserves and what he doesn't in a way that you and I can't. So there's a transcendence to Christ where he can pronounce something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so Sheol kind of evolves over time.
I mean, God is, again, we have this notion of, of revelation, progressive revelation. Now, most of the time, I mean, I'll talk about progress, when we talk about progress as a secular political philosophy is a silly superstition. Progress, in that sense, is simply change in a direction I have in life. But when we're talking about something like divine revelation, it's much more like progress in scientific, where we have a set of unknowns that actually exist, and we're just coming to know them more and more. It's like, starting from the beginning of the encyclopedia and reading to the end of it, the more I read, the more I know, because I am progressing through this series of books, but I have a clear goal. So progressive revelation here is getting us closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to Christ, who comes in the fullness of time. So, progress after that is a dubious proposition unless you're talking something like science, which is very clearly epistemologically delineated, if we want to use funky terms. But, so yes, there's this, we're going to have a lot of development downstream of all this, of things like heaven and hell, of the resurrection, of the Messiah. Right? We know something about the Son of David. I think I talked about this a few weeks ago. We have that Davidic covenant, which God apparently has broken because there isn't a king and there isn't a kingdom for him to be king of. But that's going to point us to the Messiah. That's what's going to develop. And then eventually Christ fulfills the Davidic covenant. So there's a lot more development to take place even after. And this is a relatively late book, probably, like I said, from the 400s or 300s BC. Other questions? Excellent. Well, it's almost time for medicine.
Now we know everything.
That's right. Well, honestly, it's fine.